Some stories read themselves, knowingly or even better, naively, and this is one such case. This current movie, Dead to Rights in English, more prosaically in Chinese, the Nanjing Photo Studio, and people's reactions to it have been all over my feed lately and maybe yours. It's a film set against the background of the Nanjing Massacre, a 1937 war crime perpetrated by the Japanese Imperial Army in what was then China's capital city. It's had a North American theatrical release, so if you'd like to see a contemporary mainland Chinese movie, here is one, though this is not my recommendation. The good parts are in the production values and in some pretty solid acting, even when that's made difficult by the writing, which is the film's great weakness. But even there are bright spots and smart decisions. The first is to ground the larger theme of the Nanjing Massacre in a much smaller story, character-driven. We have all these people, strangers, brought together by chance and extremes trying to survive. Far right, we have father, mother, and daughter. They're the proprietors of the photo studio, but they've hidden themselves away in a little Anne Frank apartment to ride out the horrors of the massacre. Center is a former postal worker pretending to be an apprentice at the business. He gets stopped by the Japanese invaders, and they see he's carrying photo books from this place, and they're looking for a way to develop images their photographer is taking. So the guy lies, basically, to become useful and save his skin. At rear is a policeman turned soldier for the Chinese army who ends up at the business in a surprising way I won't reveal. Then a translator for the Japanese forces and the opera-singing mistress for whom he's trying to secure passes out of the city. The second smart choice in writing is tied up with the themes, and this is an alternative poster where you can see all of the photos that have been developed going up in flames. The movie poses questions about the documentation of horrors, in this case photographs of the war crimes, how they're used, and what they might mean. The Japanese photographer, the other main character, who of course is not pictured on the poster, is taking these images for dual purposes, maybe to glorify the achievements of the Japanese Imperial Army, or as a kind of weapon of the war to demoralize the Chinese side and sap their will to resist. Which images he's going to choose, where they're going to be presented, and how they'll be interpreted variously is actually a topic of one discussion. For the Chinese characters, developing and holding on to copies of these photos is going to have an entirely different purpose: to document the horrors that they're living through. Images, in other words, aren't straightforward, but have shifting meanings that are context-dependent, a lesson that the movie half teaches but doesn't itself fully internalize. But back to our heroes. The third good part in the writing, at least for me, and this is idiosyncratic, is that the language or languages of the movie are not just Japanese and Chinese, Mandarin, that is, but also in a different language entirely, Shanghainese, which doesn't often get a big airing in mainland media. It is spoken by the translator and his mistress, but of course, only in the service of the most hackneyed stereotypes, and this is where the writing really starts to fail. Northerners, Mandarin speakers, are robust, brave heroes, and Southerners are weak, quisling traitors. Give me a fucking break. How lazy is this? The word Hanjian is thrown around a lot, which could mean a traitor to China, the Han people, but the flavor, I think, in English is better captured by the sense of calling someone a race traitor. And when you hear someone use that term earnestly, well, one, obviously you know it's an insult, but two, you know they have some pretty weird ideas going on in their head. But because of all this, I do think the standout performance in the movie is the actor who plays Guang Hai, the translator, who manages to transcend all of this and actually deliver a kind of empathetic reading and performance. Beyond line reading, that's even physical. He's just oily and gross in the movie, so you'd be surprised in real life to know that the actor himself is quite a handsome guy. Fourth, and maybe my final good point for the writing, is that there are real stakes in a Game of Thrones George R.R. Martin sense, and that only one of these characters is actually going to survive the movie. Now, in the final 30 plus minutes of the movie, everything falls apart because the overwhelming schmaltz and nationalism gets dialed up to 11 in a way that is really almost laughable and kind of undercuts the seriousness of the movie. If you've seen those American movies that have kind of patriotic speeches, swelling music, and so on at the end, like Independence Day, where if you don't actually share that headspace, it seems just batshit crazy and also laughable, this is kind of the Chinese equivalent of that. So, to be clear, I don't think it's a particularly good movie, and I don't recommend it for the aesthetic experience of it. But if, on the other hand, you want to see a representative movie from China, then yeah, I think this is a good guide to the kind of cultural production going on. But if you're looking for something actually good, maybe start with To Live. Or if you're looking for something contemporary, the same director did a movie about 2 years ago about Chinese people getting inveigled or trafficked into scam centers in Myanmar, which sounds like a contemporary kind of digital story, but in a lot of ways reminds me of the dark aspects of society even in the 18th and 19th century. And I think that is a better movie. Beyond the bad writing and schmaltz, I did find some other elements distasteful in fictionalizing what is an important historical event. Some fictionalizing is necessary and good. You need to flesh out these characters and tell a good story. Other places where you try to depict things that we know historically did not actually occur, even if they are part of mainland education, I just find quite distasteful, though, of course, I think that will go over most people's heads. That is the subject, maybe, of a different video. But to return to where I started, stories that read themselves, or give you the tools to do so. What are the meanings of images, still or moving? Who produces them and to what end? The movie brings up this question, and we might apply it to the film itself. This work is a creation of the China Film Group, a state-owned enterprise subsidiary to the Central Propaganda Department, and I think it succeeds brilliantly in transmitting the current reading of China's 20th century past. There is no shred here of the socialist internationalism interpretation that would have been so powerful for the first few generations after the war. It is, instead, an extraordinarily nationalist product of our time, 2025.